Hey guys, Mr. Discussion here. So this video is going to be a quick little video regarding a very interesting topic that I kind of came across on my timeline, which is going to be seen right here. Is this a good acheron team or no? Do I swap Cipher with someone? And I thought that this particular post offers a very interesting perspective on how vertical and horizontal cost maxing works in HSR. So to give a little bit of context, you can see this individual has an acheron, blade, car, and hyacinth. Bro does not have an Asheville, and I do not have a Tribby. So no Asheville and no Tribby. And this person is gonna be running an E0 acheron. Alright, E0 acheron. And I think everything else is pretty much not gonna be as big of an importance. So to summarize the situation so far, there's an E0 acheron, I'm assuming S1, most likely an E0 blade, maybe an E0 car, as well as the hyacinth in their current setup. Which brings me to this question. Specific, not really like about how bro's thought process was like, but more so on this question I have right here. Oh, not this question. This question. Right, this question. Cipher. Back in my days, in really long ago, I made this other video on my channel. I called it the Ranmei phenomenon from like 1 year ago, where I essentially discussed the perspectives of generalist supports in a Honkai style rail. Because if you are good for everyone, then you are not the best at what you are going to be doing it in the long term of things. Because if you are best at being good for everyone, there will be someone else that will be even better to be gooder for everyone. Case in point, Babin back in version 2, and then we had Tribby in version 3. Like, all of these are the wheelchair units, which if you were to pull a Kobe or even the E1, you're able to use them with a lot of different DPS. And I feel that for the wheelchair supports, or like the general supports as a vacuum, right, they still have quite a lot of value for the players that cannot decide what they want to play, which I think is very common practice in God Rail, because God Rail has a lot of different teams. And you can only really use 2. Now we're going to be getting 3 teams of Starward mode in Epoch Shadows tomorrow. But if you're going to be pulling for 6, 7, 8 different teams, having a generalist support is often not that bad. Like right now, originally, if I would use my free-to-play as an example, right, I put an E1 Tribby for her general support back then anyways. And I was using my E1 Tribby as a original dedicated support for D Herda and the Nexa. They were both E0. And then we were running the E1 Tribby. Then fast forward a little bit right now, I can use the E1 Tribby with D Herda. I can use the E1 Tribby with Archer. I can use the E1 Tribby with Mighty. So I have a lot of different options to fix around this E1 Tribby. Right? So that could be a very similar situation of what I think might happen with Mortenax Blade. But I don't think you need that many wheelchair supports. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you really have one wheelchair support, that's like great. But 2 wheelchair supports, or even like 3 wheelchair supports, it might be very hard to slot them and have usage for all of them at the same time for so many different teams. Alright? So that is gonna be that. But there's one other unit, and that is the topic of the video. Cipher. Alright? We are going to be talking about Cipher. I don't know if this is true, but I think Cipher had one of the lowest sales in HSR One reason, most likely because of her banner placement. Alright, her placement was like a little bit awkward, like it is what it is, right? We're gonna be getting Mimi and everything, so like, right? And then before that, you had the final, you had the fate and everything, so banner placement is definitely not too good, right? But second of all, Cipher's role also low-key reminded me a little bit of like a pseudo versatile support, right? Because true damage patronage stacking with defense down, right? All of these are pretty universal traits, right? You also have damage taken increase. They're all very universal traits. But unlike, for example, like E1 Tribi, or maybe now that I look at it, how she's gonna be H compared to Mortenax Blade, I find it very hard to slot in a Cipher team for units aside from maybe at best acheron. You could make the argument that she will be a good unit for sustainless, but nowadays we are also having a lot of different options for sustainless that you might not be tied down with using Cipher in the first place, right? Sustainless M Blade with Tribi, Sustainless Elite, and all of those other dedicated teams that run Sustainless, they also don't really care about the wheelchair things, right? You have your Firefly Sustainless, you have your Airknight Sustainless, you have your Final Sustainless, you have your Elation Sustainless, you have your Azure Sustainless. You could use Cipher, but like that cost investments you have put for Cipher, it's not as easily irreplaceable compared to the other core units, right? Cost units. So all this yapping that I kind of want to do is that I think this particular screenshot on this like Twitter post, right? It made me ponder, essentially. Like, I personally don't think this person did anything wrong if we're talking about the perspective of vertical investments. They were probably an acheron main, right? They have a E0 acheron acheron, right? They probably wanted to play acheron more during version 3, which, definitively speaking, Cipher was the best nihility slot at that point of time because we did not have access to rework weld, we did not have access to Mortenax Blade. So if you wanted to improve your acheron performance back in version 3, getting that 1-cost Cipher upgrade, it is a 1-cost worthy investment, right? Then bro also has a hyacinth, and at this point, bro put for the Mortenax Blade for acheron because Blade is obviously really, really good with acheron, right? So this led to his current account looking something like this with Cipher, Blade, Hyacinth, acheron. Now the thing is, this particular team, it is not a bad team by any means, right? You are most likely gonna be able to clear all of the endgame content with this particular lineup at E0 baseline, right? Especially with the show environment, you are probably gonna be completely fine. It is just more so that this particular buckle right here, right? This Cipher slot, it was a little bit interesting because if you had a Tribi, you were able to deal more damage. If you had an Asheville, you could also deal more damage. And nobody knew how Blade was gonna be changing for acheron. As a matter of fact, back in version 3, I think more acheron mains were hopeful for a Jiao Qiu Nova Flare instead of a unit like Blade coming along. Alright? Like, this guy legit came up from nowhere. So it really kind of threw off the trajectory of the pooling plans for acheron mains. And as a result, you are going to be ending up in this situation where your Jiao Qiu is now homeless, obviously. You're not going to slot him here anymore. You invested a cost for Cipher back in the end of version 3, and now at around the early half of version 4, you had to invest another cost with Mortenax Blade just to make acheron work. Alright, and at this point, the acheron is also going to be E0. So you're going to be running, I'm assuming this is going to be maybe a 6 to 7 cost team. Probably got a signature weapon for acheron, probably got a signature weapon for hyacinth, maybe a signature Lycon for Cipher, who knows. Then Blade E0 Azure is definitely going to be very, very viable. But like, I was thinking, is vertical cost investment just about getting that brand new unit for 1 cost? to make this team stronger? Or is it better off if you just limit your unit choices to Eidolons and Lycoons and don't expand your roster as much? Because there honestly isn't really like a right answer for this question I have, since you don't really know what the future units are gonna be. Alright, like if you were to take this same philosophy, not the of the tours, obviously. If you were to take the same philosophy and you wanted to vertical invest in Acheron's teams, right? But you didn't want to pull so many different units. Maybe you just pulled for an E2S1 Acheron back then. So you didn't pull for as many Nihility units, right? So you went for an E2S1 Acheron. Maybe because of that, you skipped Cipher, so you're still running your Tribby. Then now they came out with Mortenax Blade. It is a little bit easier to bench out this potential Nihility unit because your cost for set DPS is still in that team, right? Your E2S1 Acheron is never going to be replaced. It will always be that E2S1 Acheron because you want to play that set DPS. But on the flip side, if you were to do this, right? If you were to do this, it is very lucky that units like Acheron, right? Units like Firefly, right? To a certain extent, Fei Xiao, right? These units where you invested into their Eidolons, right? Invested for a specific unit, even if you skipped their teammates for that version, because of the way that their Eidolon worked in that baseline, it is easier for these units to pivot in that brand new version support. But if you were to be on the receiving end of another player, right? So take for example, right? If you were to go for an E2 Rapper, right? You wanted to vertical invest in a DPS. You did the exact same thing, right? You only invested your cost into a DPS, but some units in HSR just inherently gets more appreciation compared to other units for the DPS, which means they are going to be getting more dedicated supports, more dedicated sustains, and most likely their team building options will not be as widely developed compared to other units, which is what we essentially know in God Rail as the main push, right, as a flagship, which is also why Silver Wolf and Evanescence is such a interesting topic of discussion, because nobody wants to be the Rabba of Breakbro, right? Nobody wants to be the Buyo, right? Everyone wants to be the Firefly that gets the preferential treatment, gets the additional teammates, gets the all of the Nova Flares, and who knows where they're gonna be getting Nova Flare first. And if players are just gonna be playing this game fixating on which unit is gonna be having the longest longevity, right, in terms of like development in both teammates and Nova Flares, then it's very, very hard to think the actual right play on should you keep pulling new teammates on that DPS, right, dedicated supports for the DPS, or do you just stick to a more restricted team of that one DPS, so you don't pull as many teammates for the DPS, and then you just wait for the next version's upgrade? I think a very, very good example I can think of that I am also currently pondering for myself is going to be none other than D Herda. Right, D Herda is in a very interesting situation where she hasn't really gotten a lot of update for like a long ass fucking time now, right? And then people were like praying to God that Himeko is gonna make D Herda great again, right? Because Himeko is gonna be a D Herda support, right? That is what I'm saying. So there are two ways I could see D Herda from happening. So option number one, I all in E2S1 D Herda. I don't care about Anexa. I don't care about like whether or not Himeko is even gonna be a D Herda support. I just get myself that E2S1 D Herda first. Then if I can't get a good support this version, I might get a good support next version. If I don't get a Mortenax Blade in version 4, I might get a Mortenax Blade for D Herda in version 5. Because there wasn't really a Mortenax Blade for Herda, right? So it is what it is. So that's option A. Then option B is that I still keep D Herda at E0, and it opens up my cost to her teammates. So I could pull for maybe if Himeko was a D Herda support, I'll pull for Himeko. Alright, if she's not a D Herda support, fuck it, I don't pull, I just keep saving. And I can then use those costs to just either save it on your account, because you don't need to spend Stellar Jades every single patch anyways, or you can use to build another team in the first place. Because we are going to be getting 3-team Starboard mode very, very soon. So having that 3 different lineups is gonna be more of a requirement compared to back in those days where it was just a normal arbitration. So players that leave their Herdas at E0, it is easier for them to pivot out into another team or out into another unit without hoping to God that the Herda is gonna be like the next Firefly, or like the next E2 final, or like the next Avalanche. What is it gonna be, right? So that is gonna be my 2 cents on like the philosophy of whether or not do you pull for teammates or DPS islands. That is pretty much it, right? One last thing before I wrap up this whole video, which is I just think it's really, really interesting that for cars specifically, I rarely ever hear a main claiming car. So like, I think it's very obvious that Final mains will claim a Savidra. And as much as you hate Jiao Qiu, back in those days, if you were an acheron main, you definitely claimed Jiao Qiu. 100%, right? And then if you were Jing Yuan main, you could have claimed Sunday. If you were a Fei Xiao main, you're gonna claim Azrael. So like, there are these supports that like a main, the DPS main will say, okay, you know what? They are definitely gonna be like part of the gang, right? The crew, right? But like, I feel like for Car, she didn't really had that level of synergy. And my 2 cents is basically the timing of her release was a little bit too late. So if this unit came out in state of, say, Tribi, they released Car in 3.1 in state of Tribi, I think things would have probably turned out a lot more differently, because the gap between Jiao Qiu and Car in 3.1, it would have been a little bit more respectable. And an aggro mains will definitely see how much better Car is going to be, because they didn't have access to things like E1 Tribi. Alright, so it is, at least I think, it is purely from the placement of the banners in which she was not able to establish an identity either for acheron mains or even for Fei Xiao mains. Because Fei Xiao mains, they didn't really need Cipher all the time since they had access to other units. Okay, for example, right? There's one 4-star in HSR that is still really, really, really highly used for a very small group of people, and that is Mose. Alright, Mose has actually had a home with Fei Xiao for a very, very long time. And if you had things like E1 Tribi, right, if you want to run DHPT, right, and then that last slot, whether you got Asheville, maybe you're still running the Bubbin from back in the old days, I think they are all like a lot of viable options. Whereas for Car, it is gonna be a little bit more awkward, essentially. Right? So I'm not sure how they are gonna be fixing. Yeah, I guess fixing is the right word, because her kit is not really that bad, right? She has patronage stacking, which is basically true damage, but maybe one potential issue is basically, since you are holding on to your ultimate for so long, you are effectively playing with 3 ultimates. In an environment that is encouraging players to spam their ultimates with ultimate damage, right? Additional energy regeneration. So all these additional shit, it doesn't affect Cipher, since she doesn't really want to cast the ultimate immediately anyways. If you can hold it, you try to hold it and time it for the very last, like, maybe 40 to 30% of the boss max HP, and then just one-shot the boss from all of your accumulated damage. But if you don't play Cipher's ultimate that way, and you cast her ultimate every single time, maybe just to land more debuffs, maybe just to land more toughness bar damage, it doesn't really do a lot, right? Having more ultimate cast on Cipher doesn't really give you nearly as much utility compared to like an Asheville, which gives you more follow-up, a Tribi, which gives you AVDDD, or even Mortenax Blade, which is just gonna be refreshed in ultimate state as well as AoE damage, right? So I think the way they fix Car is probably gonna be doing how this whole tally mechanic works alongside with this ultimate ability. And if they can somehow find a solution for this, I think her usage will definitely come up, because her debuffs are okay, right? She already has defense now, and she already has vulnerability. So that is pretty much it. I don't think enough people really use this, which I think is also very, very fair, because once again, her banner timing is just really, really awkward. And speaking of banner timing, as we are about to approach version 4.4, maybe she might find a home with Himiko. Because I don't know if Himiko is a main DPS or sub DPS. But it would be kind of interesting if she does find a home with Himiko. Right? Maybe we do like a Car plus Blade plus Ash Veil sustainless. Because Car does have her own follow-up attacks. And then she can store all of the damage into true damage. That could be a possibility. But every single time whenever I try to think of a team comp to make with Car, right? Since the way that her kit functions is that you want to stack on as much damage as possible with Patronage. Which means that sustainless really is like the most common way to play Car. Which is not something that a lot of casual players HSR want to do. Because sustainless is not that comfortable anyways. Right? So I will see how that is going to be cooking up going forward in the future. I don't think she's going to be sticking with Archer. I don't think she has ever even been an Archer team for a very long time. I don't know if she's going to be up with like Gilgamesh, if that is even going to be a thing. So, yep. Elation is going to be maybe 4.5. Alright, Elation is already coming to an end. We're going to be going to IBC. And before you know it, we are already going to reach 4.6 and 4.7. That means version 5 is going to be upon us. So the lifespan of HSR's unit, especially for people like Car, is just so short-lived. Because they are kind of hopeless. Right? So that is going to be my 2 cents on the Cipher situation. Again, purely my subjective thoughts, 2 cents. Let me know what you guys think in the thoughts and comments down below. Word of the day is going to be, honestly, her thighs are still the biggest in the end. Okay, one of the biggest in the entire game. So that makes me really, really happy. And again, bro, this is not video because I hate Car, right? It is a very fair, a very welcoming community place of discussion with regards to meta and pooling decisions in HSR, right? So join Twitch, join YouTube, join Discord, join TikTok. Use code POKE for 10% off gamer subs. All the best for our gadget boost. And I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.